The champagne glass caught the ballroom's crystal chandelier light as Richard Hayes, our CEO, raised it high above the crowded Christmas party. His voice carried across the room when he spotted me near the dessert table. "Ellie, are you enjoying your $50,000 bonus?" Every conversation stopped. 200 faces turned toward me. My heart pounded as I met his confident gaze and replied clearly, "I never received it." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Richard's smile faltered. Whispers erupted around us. Something was terribly wrong, and I was about to find out what. Monday morning hit Innovate Tech like a freight train loaded with awkwardness. I walked through our open plan office in downtown Seattle, and conversations died mid-sentence as colleagues spotted me. Jennifer from marketing shot me a strange look before hurrying away. David from sales whispered something to his cubicle neighbor, who immediately glanced in my direction. "Ellie, can I talk to you?" My stomach dropped as Sarah Williams, our human resources director, approached my desk. Her usually warm smile seemed forced, like she was trying to swallow something bitter. We settled into her glass-walled office, surrounded by motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. Sarah fumbled with her coffee mug, avoiding eye contact. About Saturday night's incident, people are asking questions. What kind of questions? I leaned forward, studying her nervous fidgeting. Well, they heard what Richard said about your bonus. Some employees are wondering about their own compensation packages. Others are curious about the company's bonus structure in general. Sarah's voice trailed off like she was reading from a script she didn't believe. I'd spent 3 years building Innovate Tech's cybersecurity infrastructure from the ground up. When I started here at 25, fresh from my previous company's bankruptcy disaster, this place was hemorrhaging data faster than a sinking ship. Client information leaked weekly. Passwords were stored in plain text files. The entire network was held together with digital duct tape and prayers. I transformed everything. Implemented multi-layer encryption protocols, built custom firewalls that could detect threats before they knocked on our digital door, created backup systems so robust they could survive a nuclear apocalypse. Last quarter, my early warning system caught a sophisticated attack that would have cost us millions and 3 major client contracts. Richard promised me $50,000 for preventing that disaster. He shook my hand in his corner office, looking me straight in the eye. "You saved our company, Ellie. This bonus reflects how much we value your contribution." But now, sitting across from Sarah, I realized I'd never seen that money. Not in my bank account, not on my pay stub, nowhere. "Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. Did the company process a $50,000 bonus for me?" Her eyes darted toward her computer screen, then back to her hands. "These things take time, Ellie. There are processing delays, tax considerations, approval workflows. How much time?" "It's been 4 months. I'll need to check with accounting." She stood up abruptly, signaling our conversation was over. "Just give us a little more patience." Walking back to my desk, I felt like everyone was watching me through a microscope. I pulled up my banking app, scrolling through 4 months of deposits. Salary? Yes. Health insurance reimbursement? Yes. $50,000 bonus? Absolutely not. That afternoon, I was calibrating firewall settings when I heard Richard's voice drifting from the conference room. He was speaking loudly enough that his words carried through the supposedly soundproof glass walls. "Absolutely. We believe in rewarding top talent. Just last quarter, we distributed $50,000 performance bonuses to our key technical staff. It's this kind of investment that drives our retention rates and keeps our best people motivated." My hands froze over the keyboard. He was talking to someone important, probably an investor, bragging about bonuses he'd never actually paid. I spent the rest of the day using my administrative access to dig through our company's financial records. What I found made my blood turn cold. There it was, clear as daylight, an expense report showing a $50,000 bonus payment to Ellie Morrison. But the money hadn't gone to my bank account. Instead, it had been transferred to something called Strategic Consulting Solutions, LLC. I'd never heard of Strategic Consulting Solutions. A quick corporate database search revealed it was registered in Delaware with Richard Hayes listed as the sole owner. My boss had been stealing my bonus money and using my name to justify the expense. He was committing fraud, and I was his unwitting accomplice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that expense report, about Richard's confident lies to investors, about the shell company, designed to hide stolen money. But there was something else nagging at me, something important I was forgetting. At 3 a.m, it hit me like lightning. My employment contract. I'd negotiated specific language after my previous company collapsed due to embezzlement. I'd wanted protection, something to prevent another financial disaster from destroying my career. I grabbed my laptop and logged into the company database to find my original contract. 27 pages of legal language. But buried in Section 15 was the clause I'd almost forgotten about. Employee maintains supervisory control over all digital assets and system access in cases of suspected financial irregularities or fraudulent activities, pending resolution of said irregularities through appropriate legal channels. I'd fought hard for that clause, remembering how helpless I'd felt when my previous employer's executives had destroyed evidence and blamed innocent employees for their crimes. This time, I'd made sure I had legal protection. Reading those words again, I realized I wasn't as powerless as I'd thought. Tuesday evening found me alone in the office, fluorescent lights humming overhead as I dissected every word of my employment contract. Most people would find legal documents about as exciting as watching paint dry, but this contract represented 3 years of careful negotiation to protect myself from corporate fraud. The clause in Section 15 was even more powerful than I'd remembered. It didn't just give me authority to restrict system access during suspected fraud. It granted me temporary supervisory control over all digital assets and required the company to maintain employee in current position, pending resolution through appropriate legal channels. Essentially, I couldn't be fired while investigating potential fraud, and I had legal authority to lock down systems to prevent evidence tampering. Wednesday morning, I called Linda Foster, Innovate Tech's corporate attorney. Linda was a sharp woman in her early 40s who'd helped negotiate several of our major client contracts. She had a reputation for thoroughness and integrity that made her respected throughout Seattle's tech legal community. Ellie, good to hear from you. Linda, I need to discuss something confidential. Can we meet this afternoon? Her voice shifted into professional mode. Of course. Does this relate to company business? It relates to potential financial irregularities. I'd prefer to discuss details in person. 2 hours later, I sat across from Linda in her downtown law office, surrounded by leather-bound legal volumes and certificates from the Washington State Bar. I laid out everything: the promised bonus, Richard's public lies, the expense report showing payment to his shell company, and the pattern of fraud I discovered. Linda listened without interruption, taking detailed notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, processing the information. Ellie, this is serious. If what you're describing is accurate, Richard could be facing federal charges for investor fraud and embezzlement. There's something else. I handed her a copy of my employment contract with Section 15 highlighted. I want you to read this clause carefully. Linda studied the contract language, her expression growing more concerned with each word. When she reached the end, she looked up at me with something approaching shock. My God, Ellie, do you understand what this means? I think so, but I want to hear your professional opinion. This clause gives you extraordinary legal protection and authority. More importantly, they cannot terminate your employment while you're exercising this authority. Linda pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. We need to document everything properly. This clause was designed to protect whistleblowers, but it also protects you from retaliation. Over the next hour, Linda helped me understand the full implications of my discovery. Richard hadn't just stolen my bonus. He'd been reporting fake employee bonuses to investors and the board of directors for months, using these false expenses to inflate the company's operational costs and justify higher funding requests. Innovate Tech was currently seeking a $20 million funding round from major venture capital firms. Richard's presentations to investors included data about employee satisfaction, retention rates, and performance bonuses that were completely fabricated. The fraudulent bonus reporting isn't just theft, Ellie. It's securities fraud. Richard is lying to potential investors about the company's financial practices and operational expenses. Linda pulled up Innovate Tech's recent SEC filings on her computer. Look at this. The company reported $1.2 million in employee performance bonuses last quarter. But according to what you've found, most of these bonuses were never actually paid to employees. How many people are affected? Based on these filings, potentially dozens of employees across multiple departments. Richard has been systematically stealing promised bonuses and using fake expense reports to hide the theft. I felt sick thinking about my colleagues who'd worked extra hours, met impossible deadlines, and sacrificed personal time believing they'd be rewarded for their dedication. Instead, their efforts had been used to line Richard's pockets. Linda, what happens if I use the contract clause to lock down systems? You'd be legally protected, but Richard will likely retaliate. He'll try to paint you as a disgruntled employee or claim you're sabotaging the company. You need to be prepared for a fight. What's the alternative? Let him continue stealing from employees and lying to investors? Linda closed my contract and looked at me seriously. Ellie, I need to be clear about my position. As Innovate Tech's corporate counsel, I have obligations to the company, but I also have ethical obligations to report suspected criminal activity. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you decide to move forward with this, you'll have my support. What Richard is doing violates both company policy and federal law. The board of directors needs to know what's happening. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I had evidence of fraud, legal protection to act on it, and a corporate attorney willing to support me. But I also knew that confronting Richard would change everything. That evening, I made my decision. I wouldn't let Richard continue stealing from employees or lying to investors. I'd spent too many years building systems to protect companies from external threats to ignore an internal threat this serious. It was time to exercise the authority my contract provided. Thursday morning, I requested a private meeting with Richard. His assistant, Patricia, squeezed me into his schedule between a board call and a client presentation. Walking into his corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, I felt like David approaching Goliath. Richard sat behind his massive oak desk. Expensive suit, immaculate. Confidence radiating from every gesture. He'd built Innovate Tech from a 3-person startup into a company with over 200 employees. His success had made him comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. Ellie, great to see you. Patricia said you wanted to discuss something important. I placed printed copies of the expense reports and bank transfers on his desk. Richard, we need to talk about the $50,000 bonus you announced at the Christmas party. His smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. He glanced at the documents without picking them up. Of course. Like Sarah mentioned, there are processing delays with large bonus payments, lots of tax considerations and approval workflows to navigate. These documents show the bonus was processed 4 months ago. The money went to Strategic Consulting Solutions LLC, a company you own. The silence stretched between us like a live wire. Richard's confident mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something calculating and dangerous underneath. Ellie, I think there's been a misunderstanding. These financial records are confidential company information. You shouldn't have access to them. I'm the head of cybersecurity. I have administrative access to protect company data. Not anymore. Richard picked up his phone. Patricia, get me Tom from IT immediately. Within minutes, Tom Bradley, our IT coordinator, appeared in the doorway looking nervous. Tom was a good kid, fresh out of college, who'd always been respectful and eager to learn. Tom, I need you to revoke Ellie's system access immediately. She's been violating company policy by accessing unauthorized financial information. Tom's face went white. Sir, Ellie is my supervisor. She has the highest level access privileges. Not anymore. Effective immediately, Ellie Morrison is terminated for security violations and unauthorized access to confidential records. I stood up slowly, feeling surprisingly calm despite my racing heart. Richard, I need to inform you of something important. Under Section 15 of my employment contract, you cannot terminate me while I'm investigating suspected financial irregularities. What are you talking about? I pulled out a copy of my contract and placed it on his desk, next to the expense reports. This clause gives me authority to investigate potential fraud and protects me from retaliation during that investigation. Richard grabbed the contract and read quickly, his face growing darker with each word. When he finished, he looked up at me with pure fury. You think you can threaten me? I built this company from nothing. I won't be blackmailed by some paranoid IT worker who doesn't understand how business works. I understand how embezzlement works, Richard, and I understand how securities fraud works. Get out of my office. Security will escort you out of the building. Read the contract clause again, Richard. I'm not going anywhere. That afternoon, everything changed. Richard called an emergency staff meeting and painted me as a rogue employee who'd been accessing unauthorized systems and violating company security policies. He claimed I'd created vulnerabilities in our network that could compromise client data. Unfortunately, we've discovered that Ellie Morrison has been conducting unauthorized access of confidential company information. While we investigate the full scope of these violations, she'll be restricted from normal duties. My colleagues looked at me like I'd sprouted horns. Jennifer from marketing, who'd always been friendly, now avoided eye contact. David from sales whispered to his neighbor about criminal activity, but Richard wasn't finished. Over the next 2 days, he orchestrated a campaign to destroy my reputation within the company. He spread rumors that I was under investigation for potential criminal charges. He suggested that my unauthorized access had created security vulnerabilities that could cost the company millions. Friday afternoon brought the final blow. Richard announced that our systems had experienced a security breach overnight. Client data had been accessed by unknown parties, and the attack vector appeared to be related to recent unauthorized system modifications. I knew immediately that Richard had staged the breach. The attack he described didn't match any real threat patterns, and the supposed vulnerabilities were in systems I hadn't touched. But my colleagues didn't know that. They saw their boss explaining how a trusted employee had potentially compromised their livelihoods. Walking through the office felt like running a gauntlet. Former friends treated me like a criminal. People I'd worked with for 3 years stepped aside when I passed, as if fraud might be contagious. But Richard had made a critical mistake. In his rush to discredit me, he'd tried to destroy financial records that proved his embezzlement. He'd ordered accounting to clean up old expense reports and delete unnecessary backup files. What he didn't realize was that I'd already created encrypted copies of everything. Every fraudulent expense report, every fake bonus payment, every lie he'd told to investors was safely stored in systems he couldn't access or destroy. That evening, alone in my apartment overlooking Green Lake, I made a decision that would change everything. Richard thought he could frame me for his crimes and destroy evidence of his fraud. He thought his position as CEO made him untouchable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I spent the weekend preparing for war. I documented every piece of evidence, created multiple encrypted backups, and developed a plan to use my contract authority to preserve proof of Richard's crimes. Monday morning, I would activate the nuclear option. Monday arrived gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived at the office early, before the morning rush, and began the most important forensic investigation of my career. Using my administrative access, I dove deep into Innovate Tech's financial systems, following digital breadcrumbs that Richard thought he'd hidden. What I discovered made my stolen bonus look like pocket change. Richard hadn't just been embezzling employee bonuses. He'd been systematically stealing from client accounts for 18 months. Small amounts at first, 2 or 3% skimmed from payment processing before funds reached client accounts. But as his confidence grew, so did his appetite. TechFlow Industries, one of our biggest clients, had been paying us $150,000 monthly for cybersecurity services. Richard had been shaving off $15,000 each month, redirecting it to various shell companies he controlled. Over 18 months, he'd stolen nearly $270,000 from just this one client. The pattern repeated across multiple accounts. MedDevice Solutions, another major client, had been shortchanged $86,000 over the same period. DataStream Corp was missing nearly $120,000. The more I dug, the more theft I uncovered. But the most shocking discovery came when I accessed our internal financial projections. Innovate Tech wasn't the thriving success story Richard presented to investors. We were hemorrhaging money, falling behind on vendor payments, and struggling to meet basic operational expenses. The upcoming $20 million funding round wasn't about expansion and growth. It was a desperate attempt to avoid bankruptcy and cover up Richard's embezzlement before clients discovered their missing money. I pulled up the investor presentation Richard had been preparing for Friday's crucial meeting with Pacific Northwest Venture Partners. The financial projections were completely fabricated, revenue numbers inflated by 30%, employee satisfaction metrics based on non-existent bonus programs, growth rates that assumed client contracts we didn't actually have. If Richard succeeded in securing this funding, he'd be committing massive securities fraud against sophisticated investors who trusted his representations about the company's financial health. But there was more. I discovered that several client accounts were now dangerously low on funds due to Richard's systematic theft. MedDevice Solutions was expecting a $50,000 security upgrade next month that we couldn't afford to provide. TechFlow Industries had budgeted for enhanced monitoring services that our depleted resources couldn't support. When these clients realized they weren't receiving services they'd paid for, they'd demand investigations. When those investigations revealed missing funds, Richard would need scapegoats. Employees like me, with system access and technical knowledge, would make perfect targets for blame. I was already being positioned as the fall guy for the fake security breach. It wouldn't be difficult for Richard to expand that narrative, claiming I'd been stealing client funds and covering my tracks by manipulating financial records. The genius of his plan was its simplicity. Blame the cybersecurity expert for cybersecurity-related theft. Point to my unauthorized access as evidence of criminal behavior. Use my own legitimate investigative activities as proof of wrongdoing. But Richard had underestimated two crucial factors. First, I documented everything before he could destroy it. Second, my employment contract gave me legal authority to preserve evidence and prevent further destruction of company records. Tuesday evening, I met again with Linda Foster. Her law office felt like a war room as we spread financial documents across her conference table, mapping out the full scope of Richard's fraud. Ellie, this is far worse than we initially thought. Richard isn't just stealing bonuses. He's operating a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that could destroy the company and harm multiple clients. How much money are we talking about? Linda consulted her calculator. Based on your documentation, approximately $1.8 million stolen from employee bonuses and client accounts over 18 months. If he secures Friday's funding round through fraudulent representations, add another $20 million in investor fraud. What about the clients who've been shortchanged? They'll likely file civil lawsuits and demand criminal prosecution. When they discover their missing funds, they'll want immediate restitution plus damages. Innovate Tech doesn't have the resources to cover those claims. I thought about my colleagues, hard-working people who had no idea their jobs were built on a foundation of fraud and theft. When the truth came out, many of them would lose their positions through no fault of their own. Linda, I have a moral obligation to stop this before Friday's investor meeting. Those venture capital partners don't deserve to lose $20 million to Richard's lies. I agree, but you need to understand the risks. Once you exercise your contract authority to lock down systems, there's no going back. Richard will use every resource at his disposal to discredit and destroy you. What's the alternative? Let him succeed and watch innocent people suffer for his crimes? Wednesday night, I made my final preparations. I created comprehensive digital dossiers, documenting every aspect of Richard's fraud, stored them in encrypted offshore systems he couldn't access or subpoena, and developed a timeline for system lockdown that would preserve maximum evidence while causing minimum harm to innocent employees. I also did something else. I reached out to David Kim, an investigative journalist at the Seattle Tech Tribune who specialized in startup fraud cases. David had covered several high-profile embezzlement cases in recent years and had a reputation for thorough, accurate reporting. David, I have information about significant corporate fraud at a major Seattle tech company. Are you interested in hearing about systematic embezzlement, securities fraud, and client account theft? I'm listening. Can you provide documentation? Complete financial records, bank transfers, shell company registrations, and fabricated investor presentations. Everything you'd need to verify the story independently. When can we meet? Thursday morning. I implemented the first phase of my plan. Using my administrative authority under Section 15 of my contract, I began restricting Richard's access to financial systems. Nothing dramatic at first, just background limitations designed to prevent further evidence tampering. Richard didn't notice immediately. He was too focused on preparing for Friday's investor presentation, practicing his pitch about Innovate Tech's bright future and sustainable growth. But Thursday evening, when he tried to access client account information for last-minute adjustments to his funding proposal, he discovered that his access had been revoked. That's when he realized the war had begun. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of crisp Seattle day that makes you forget about the rain. But inside Innovate Tech's headquarters, storm clouds were gathering as Richard discovered the full scope of his access restrictions. I arrived at 7 a.m. to find him pacing his office like a caged animal, phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders at our overwhelmed IT coordinator. Tom, I don't care what you have to do. Restore my system access immediately. I have the most important presentation of the company's history in 3 hours. Poor Tom looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sir, I can't override Ellie's administrative restrictions. The contract clause you showed me yesterday gives her authority over system security during fraud investigations. What fraud investigation? There is no fraud investigation. I knocked on Richard's open door, coffee in hand, projecting calm confidence despite my racing heart. Actually, there is. I formally notified Linda Foster and the board of directors yesterday about ongoing financial irregularities. Per Section 15 of my contract, all relevant systems are now under protective lockdown pending resolution. Richard's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. You can't do this, Ellie. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm preserving evidence of crimes you've already committed. Get out of my office before I call security. Your security team reports to me through the IT chain of command. They're not going to remove the person legally authorized to protect company systems. At 8:30 a.m., Richard received devastating news. Pacific Northwest Venture Partners had arrived early for their 9:30 presentation and were waiting in the main conference room, along with 3 other potential investors and 2 board members. Richard rushed to his computer to pull up his carefully crafted presentation, only to discover that his access to the company's financial databases had been completely revoked. He couldn't retrieve revenue projections, growth charts, client satisfaction metrics, or any of the fabricated data he'd planned to share. Patricia! He screamed for his assistant. Get me those financial reports I was working on yesterday. Sir, I can't access them either. The system says I don't have authorization. By 9 a.m., Richard was frantically trying to reconstruct his presentation from memory, while his assistant attempted to reach backup files that no longer existed. The investors sat in the conference room, checking their phones and growing increasingly impatient. Linda Foster arrived at 9:15, carrying a thick folder of legal documents. She knocked on my office door with a grim expression. Ellie, I've filed formal complaints with the SEC and the Washington State Attorney General's office. FBI Financial Crimes Unit has been notified about potential federal violations. How long before they respond? Based on the severity of the allegations and the quality of your evidence, Probably within hours, they'll want to secure the company's financial records before Richard can destroy anything else. At 9:30 sharp, Richard walked into the conference room to face the most important audience of his career. Pacific Northwest Venture Partners had committed to potentially leading a $20 million funding round. Cascade Investment Group was considering $5 million. Tech Forward Ventures wanted to invest another $3 million. Without his fabricated financial data, Richard was forced to improvise. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Innovate Tech represents an unprecedented opportunity in the cybersecurity space. Our growth trajectory has been exceptional, our client retention rate is outstanding, and our employee satisfaction metrics demonstrate the kind of team stability that drives long-term success. James Morrison, senior partner at Pacific Northwest Venture Partners, interrupted politely. Richard, these are impressive claims. Can you show us the supporting financial documentation? Of course. Patricia is preparing those reports now. There's been a minor technical delay with our presentation systems. Technical delay? Sarah Chen from Cascade Investment Group raised an eyebrow. At a cybersecurity company? Richard's confident demeanor began cracking around the edges. We're implementing new security protocols that temporarily restrict access to sensitive financial data. It's actually a demonstration of how seriously we take information protection. For the next hour, Richard tap-danced around increasingly specific questions about revenue figures, client contracts, and operational expenses. He quoted statistics from memory that seemed impressive but couldn't be verified. He made promises about growth rates and market penetration that sounded wonderful but lacked supporting evidence. The investors grew visibly frustrated. These weren't naive, first-time entrepreneurs. They were sophisticated financial professionals who'd heard every pitch imaginable. They could smell desperation and deception from across the table. Richard, James Morrison finally said, we've seen enough. Without proper financial documentation, we can't evaluate this investment opportunity. Perhaps we should reschedule when your technical issues are resolved. Wait, please. I can explain everything. There's been a misunderstanding about our data access protocols. What kind of misunderstanding requires the CEO to be locked out of his own company's financial systems? That's when Linda Foster entered the conference room, followed by two men in dark suits, who introduced themselves as Special Agent Rodriguez and Special Agent Thompson from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Mr. Hayes, we need to speak with you immediately regarding allegations of securities fraud and embezzlement. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. The investors looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to anger. Sarah Chen closed her laptop with an audible snap. Mr. Hayes, Agent Rodriguez continued, we're executing a federal warrant to preserve all financial records and computer systems pending investigation of suspected criminal activity. Richard's face went white. This is a misunderstanding. A disgruntled employee has been spreading false accusations. Sir, we've reviewed extensive documentation of fraudulent expense reports, falsified investor presentations, and systematic theft from client accounts. The evidence is quite comprehensive. James Morrison stood up slowly. Richard, Pacific Northwest Venture Partners withdraws from all funding considerations. Our legal team will review whether your solicitation of investment constitutes fraud against our firm. One by one, the other investors followed suit. Within 10 minutes, $28 million in potential funding had evaporated like morning mist. Richard slumped in his chair, watching his empire crumble around him. Everything he'd built through years of legitimate work was being destroyed by months of criminal greed. But his humiliation wasn't complete yet. Agent Thompson addressed the room with professional courtesy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is now an active federal investigation. We'll need to interview all board members and employees with access to financial systems. The company's assets will be frozen pending resolution of criminal charges. As federal agents began securing evidence and taking statements, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but many innocent people would suffer for Richard's crimes. The war was won, but the battlefield was littered with casualties. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit moved with the efficiency of a surgical team. Within 4 hours, they'd seized computers, financial records, and banking information covering every aspect of Innovate Tech's operations. The company that had buzzed with activity that morning was now eerily quiet. Employees huddled in small groups whispering about layoffs and criminal charges. Agent Rodriguez found me in my office, where I'd been monitoring system security during the chaos. Despite everything, I still felt responsible for protecting our legitimate client data from any actual security threats. Miss Morrison, thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your documentation has been invaluable. Agent Rodriguez, what happens to the employees who had nothing to do with Richard's crimes? That's not my area, but I can tell you that federal prosecutors are impressed with the quality of evidence you preserved. Without your intervention, Mr. Hayes likely would have destroyed critical proof and potentially stolen $20 million more. Monday morning brought a parade of news crews to our building. The Seattle Tech Tribune story had gone viral over the weekend, picked up by national business publications and technology blogs. Seattle startup CEO arrested for $1 million embezzlement scheme dominated local headlines. David Kim's investigative reporting was thorough and devastating. He'd verified every claim I'd provided, interviewed affected clients, and uncovered additional evidence of Richard's fraudulent activities. The story painted a picture of systematic corporate corruption that shocked the local tech community. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from journalists, job offers from competing firms, and messages of support from cybersecurity professionals who'd followed the case. But I also received angry voicemails from former colleagues who blamed me for destroying their jobs and threatening their livelihoods. Tuesday brought more bad news for Innovate Tech. TechFlow Industries filed a civil lawsuit demanding immediate restitution of stolen funds plus punitive damages. MedDevice Solutions followed with their own lawsuit. DataStream Corp announced they were terminating their service contract and seeking a new cybersecurity provider. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted to file for bankruptcy protection. With major clients departing and legal costs mounting, the company couldn't survive Richard's criminal legacy. Linda Foster called Wednesday afternoon with mixed news. Ellie, the U.S. Attorney's Office wants to offer you federal whistleblower protection and immunity in exchange for your testimony. They're also recommending you for the SEC's Whistleblower Reward Program. What about Richard? He's been indicted on 14 federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and embezzlement. His lawyers are discussing a plea deal, but prosecutors want significant prison time given the scope of his crimes. How much time? Potentially 8 to 12 years if he goes to trial and loses. The plea deal might reduce that to 5 or 6 years, but he'd have to make full restitution to victims and forfeit all assets obtained through criminal activity. Thursday brought personal consequences I hadn't anticipated. Jennifer from marketing confronted me in the parking lot as I was leaving work. Ellie, do you realize what you've done? 200 people are losing their jobs because of your vendetta against Richard. Jennifer, this isn't about a vendetta. Richard stole nearly $2 million and was planning to steal $20 million more. Would you prefer I'd let him continue? I'd prefer my kids didn't have to worry about how we're going to pay rent next month. Her words stung because they contained truth. My decision to expose Richard's crimes had unavoidable consequences for innocent people. There was no clean way to stop fraud without harming those who depended on the fraudulent company for their livelihoods. But Friday brought validation that my choice had been correct. Agent Rodriguez called with an update about the broader investigation. Miss Morrison, we've discovered that Mr. Hayes was planning to expand his embezzlement scheme significantly. He'd identified 3 other tech companies as potential acquisition targets, and we believe he intended to use fraudulent funding to purchase them and loot their assets. How many more people could he have hurt? Potentially thousands of employees and hundreds of millions in investor funds. Your actions prevented a much larger criminal enterprise. The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Richard's high-priced defense attorneys quickly realized their client had no viable defense against the mountain of evidence I'd preserved. Every fraudulent transaction was documented. Every fake expense report was time-stamped and digitally signed. Every lie to investors was recorded in emails and presentation files. 3 weeks after his arrest, Richard Hayes pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for an 8-year federal prison sentence. The plea agreement required him to forfeit his house, his luxury cars, his investment accounts, and all assets purchased with stolen money. Federal marshals auctioned Richard's assets to fund victim restitution. The proceeds weren't enough to make everyone whole, but they covered most of the stolen employee bonuses and client funds. Innovate Tech's bankruptcy auction was less successful. The company's reputation had been so damaged by the fraud scandal that potential buyers viewed our assets as toxic. Our office building, computer equipment, and client contracts sold for pennies on the dollar. Most of my colleagues found new jobs within a few months. The Seattle tech market was strong enough to absorb displaced workers, and many companies viewed former Innovate Tech employees as victims rather than accomplices, but some relationships never recovered. People I'd considered friends treated me like a traitor who'd chosen justice over loyalty. They weren't entirely wrong. I had chosen principle over personal relationships, legal obligations over workplace solidarity. The emotional toll was heavier than I'd anticipated. Therapy helped me process the guilt, anger, and isolation that followed my decision to become a whistleblower. Dr. Sarah Martinez, my counselor, helped me understand that choosing to do the right thing doesn't always feel good, especially when good people suffer unintended consequences. Ellie, you prevented greater harm by stopping Richard's crimes early. Yes. People lost jobs, but they would have lost jobs anyway when his scheme inevitably collapsed. At least this way, he can't hurt anyone else. 6 months after Richard's arrest, I received a letter from the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower. My information had led to successful enforcement actions and recovery of stolen funds. I was eligible for a whistleblower award of $250,000, 10% of the recovered money. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fought for a $50,000 bonus and ended up receiving 5 times that amount for exposing the theft of my original bonus. But money couldn't repair the relationships I'd lost, or erase the guilt I felt about my colleagues' suffering. Success in stopping corporate crime came with a price I was still learning to accept. The legal system had worked. Justice had been served. Richard would spend the next 8 years in federal prison, and his victims would receive restitution for their losses. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild my career and my life in the aftermath of doing the right thing. 1 year after Richard's arrest, I stood in my new office overlooking Puget Sound, watching ferry boats navigate between the islands that dotted Seattle's beautiful harbor. The sign on my door read Ellie Morrison, CEO, Secure Shield Consulting LLC. Starting my own cybersecurity firm had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'd used part of my SEC Whistleblower Award to lease office space, purchase equipment, and hire my first employees. 3 of them were former Innovate Tech colleagues who'd weathered the scandal and chose to trust me with their professional futures. Marcus Chen, my lead systems analyst, knocked on my office door. Ellie, the Hamilton Investment Group presentation went perfectly. They want to sign a 2-year contract for fraud prevention consulting. Marcus had been one of the few colleagues who'd supported me throughout the investigation. He'd lost his job at Innovate Tech, but never blamed me for exposing the truth. His loyalty meant more to me than any professional achievement. That's fantastic news, Marcus. Hamilton will be our biggest client yet. They were particularly impressed with your methodology for detecting financial irregularities in real time. The automated monitoring system you developed could revolutionize how investment firms protect themselves from internal fraud. Secure Shield's specialty was preventing exactly the kind of crimes Richard had committed. We helped companies implement systems and contracts that made executive embezzlement nearly impossible to hide. Our tagline was simple: protecting honest business from dishonest leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Foster, who'd become both a trusted advisor and a close friend. Saw the Hamilton announcement in the Tech Tribune. Congratulations on your success. Linda had left corporate law after the Innovate Tech scandal and joined a firm specializing in white-collar criminal defense. She'd found her calling representing whistleblowers and helping expose corporate fraud. Our parallel career transformations had bonded us in ways neither of us had expected. That afternoon, I received an email that made me smile. Jennifer from marketing, who'd confronted me so angrily in the parking lot a year ago, had been hired as communications director for a clean energy startup. Her new company was considering Secure Shield for their cybersecurity consulting. Ellie, I owe you an apology. I was angry about losing my job and blamed you for doing the right thing. Would you be willing to meet for coffee and discuss how Secure Shield might help us prevent the kind of problems Innovate Tech experienced? Forgiveness had been a crucial part of my healing process. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that people's anger was often misdirected pain, and that holding grudges would poison my own success. Jennifer's email represented a form of closure I'd hoped for, but never expected. Tuesday evening brought another surprise. David Kim from the Seattle Tech Tribune called with news that still amazed me. Ellie, the Society of Professional Journalists wants to present you with their Ethics in Business Reporting Award. Your decision to expose corporate fraud, even at personal cost, exemplifies the kind of integrity they want to recognize. David, I appreciate the recognition, but you did the hard work of investigating and reporting the story. I just wrote about what you uncovered. The awards and recognition were gratifying, but the real satisfaction came from my daily work. Every fraud prevention system I installed, every contract clause I negotiated, every training session I conducted helped protect honest employees from dishonest executives. Wednesday brought my favorite type of client meeting. Protect Solutions was a growing software company whose CEO, Amanda Rodriguez, wanted to implement comprehensive fraud prevention measures before seeking venture capital funding. Ellie, we've read about what happened at Innovate Tech. We never want our employees to experience that kind of betrayal. Amanda, fraud prevention starts with leadership commitment. The systems I design are only effective when executives genuinely want to maintain ethical standards. That's exactly what we want. We've built this company on trust and integrity. Working with ethical leaders like Amanda reminded me why I'd chosen this career path. For every Richard Hayes who corrupted his position, there were dozens of business owners who wanted to do the right thing and needed help creating structures that supported ethical behavior. Friday afternoon brought the most satisfying news of all. Agent Rodriguez called with an update about Richard's imprisonment. Miss Morrison, I thought you'd like to know that Mr. Hayes is participating in a federal prison program for white-collar criminals. He's teaching other inmates about business ethics and the consequences of corporate fraud. He's teaching ethics? Apparently, his experience has given him unique insights into how good people make bad decisions. The prison counselors say he's genuinely remorseful and trying to prevent other people from following his path. How much longer does he have to serve? About 4 more years, assuming good behavior. When he's released, he'll be banned from serving as an executive or board member of any publicly traded company. Learning about Richard's transformation didn't erase the pain he'd caused, but it suggested that justice could include rehabilitation as well as punishment. Perhaps his crimes could ultimately serve a constructive purpose if they prevented other executives from making similar choices. 6 months later, I stood before an audience of 500 cybersecurity professionals at the annual Pacific Northwest Information Security Conference. My keynote speech was titled, "When Employees Must Police Employers: Ethics and Law in Corporate Cybersecurity." The most dangerous threats to company security don't always come from external hackers. Sometimes they come from the corner office. As cybersecurity professionals, we have unique responsibilities and powerful tools to protect not just company data, but company integrity. The standing ovation that followed felt like validation for every difficult choice I'd made over the past 2 years. The audience included employees who'd found the courage to report corporate fraud at their own companies, inspired partly by my example. After the speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Miss Morrison, I'm dealing with a situation at my company that's similar to what you experienced. My boss has been falsifying client billings and threatening to fire anyone who questions the numbers. I don't know what to do. What's your name? Jessica Campbell. I'm a junior systems administrator at a consulting firm downtown. I handed Jessica my business card and wrote my personal cell phone number on the back. Jessica, call me tomorrow. Secure Shield provides free consultations for employees facing ethical dilemmas. You don't have to navigate this alone. That evening, driving home through Seattle's evening traffic, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years ago, I'd been a cybersecurity expert, focused on protecting companies from external threats. Today, I was helping protect companies from themselves. The path hadn't been easy. I'd lost friends, endured public scrutiny, and faced financial uncertainty while building my new career. But I'd also gained something invaluable: the knowledge that I could trust myself to do the right thing, even when the consequences were painful and uncertain. Secure Shield now employed 12 people and served 37 clients across the Pacific Northwest. We'd help prevent embezzlement schemes, detect fraudulent financial reporting, and implement governance systems that made corporate crime much more difficult. More importantly, we'd created a model that other cybersecurity firms were beginning to adopt. The idea that IT professionals had ethical obligations beyond technical competence was spreading throughout the industry. My personal life had also found balance. Dr. Martinez and I had completed our therapy work, though I still saw her occasionally for maintenance sessions. I'd reconnected with old friends who'd supported me during the crisis and made new friends among fellow entrepreneurs and reformed colleagues. Dating had been challenging at first. Potential partners either saw me as a heroic whistleblower or a disloyal troublemaker, neither of which captured the complexity of my actual experience. But eventually I'd met people who understood that doing the right thing sometimes requires difficult choices. The final lesson I'd learned was perhaps the most important. Integrity isn't about being perfect or avoiding mistakes. It's about having the courage to act on your values when the stakes are highest and the consequences are most uncertain. Standing in my office that Friday evening, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay, I felt deep satisfaction with the choice I'd made to expose Richard's fraud. Yes, people had suffered in the short term. Yes, I'd paid a personal price for my decision. But the alternative would have been much worse. If I'd stayed silent, Richard would have stolen millions more dollars from investors and clients. Dozens of additional employees would have built their careers on a foundation of lies. The inevitable collapse would have been far more devastating when it finally came. Instead, justice had been served, criminals had been punished, and victims had received restitution. More importantly, my experience had helped other companies prevent similar crimes and given other employees the courage to speak up about corporate fraud. The woman who'd walked into that Christmas party 18 months ago, shocked by her CEO's public lie about an unpaid bonus, had evolved into someone who understood that protecting digital systems meant protecting the integrity of the organizations they served. Sometimes the greatest cybersecurity threat comes from the very people who sign your paycheck. When that happens, the only solution is the courage to act on your principles, regardless of the personal cost. And sometimes, when you fight for what's right, you discover that you're stronger than you knew and that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, ultimately leads to opportunities you never could have imagined. That's a lesson worth $50,000, a prison sentence for a criminal CEO, and a successful new career built on the foundation of unshakable integrity. Asterisk. What would you do if you discovered your boss was stealing from employees and lying to investors? Have you ever had to choose between job security and doing what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about people who found the courage to fight back against injustice, and please share this with anyone who might be facing their own workplace ethical dilemma. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. Remember, sometimes standing up for what's right is the only way to create the change you want to see in the world.